All right, we should be online. I hope so. So, greetings from Helsinki and hello to Nairobi, Kenya. This is the book launch webinar of the translation of the publication Relational Response to Climate Change. And my name is Tapio Luomaho. I'm currently in Helsinki, Finland, and Calum Samuelson is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya, where he's teaching and studying in the Nazarene University in Nairobi. It's great to have you here, Calum. We have some challenges with the internet connection. The problem is not in Africa currently. The problem is in Finland. So we will make this introduction very, very short, and we will actually go straight away to the presentation by Calum. So this is a book launch webinar, and I just want to say first that you can download the publication from the Sallux website. That will cost like €2.50 for the download, and the Finnish translation can be found for free in the Compassi website. So today we are talking about relational thinking. We're talking about climate change, environmental issues in general, and how do these things link together. We're talking about values, and we will look for some answers to these questions from theology. And Samuel has done extremely interesting job with this publication. I have here the English copy with me, and we will hear more from him. And I really hope everything works out well. At least we have some people watching live, so everything should work now. So over to you, Calum. We have a few slides, and I will show them, and hopefully I will be able to change them at the right time. So you can show me some signal when you want me to change the slides. So let's try to move on, and really glad to have you here, Calum.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I wonder if there's a way, because Tapio cannot understand me, or hear me. I wonder if there's a way that somebody else can signal if I'm registering or being picked up. This is a new thing for me. But yeah, I'm very excited for this launch, and I want to offer a few preliminary comments. Really, the comments first would you see the logos here of these different organizations, and much of my research, much of this book is built upon previous work that has come from these organizations. And so if you're unfamiliar with relational thinking and the relational thinking networks that are connected to Sallux and the Jubilee Center, that's referenced quite a bit in the book. So you'll want to follow up with those things. The second thing I'd like to say before we begin is that this book has a very strong theological perspective, and that will come as a surprise or perhaps something different to many readers. And I'm no stranger to the fact that many people in the public policy area think theology has no place. But I'd like to offer, it's important for me to mention that a lot of theology that has been done in recent decades is really, it's really not true theology from many people's perspectives, because it's disconnected from the real practical concerns, needs, and problems of people in the real world. And so our intention with this publication is not somehow to smuggle theology into political discussions, but rather to take very seriously the fact that politics deal often with the deepest needs of people and real problems that people are being faced with. And that's classically been the concern of theology as well. The questions that people are asking about how to live life well, the concerns that they have about these types of things. And so I just want to apologize, I guess, personally, for a lot of theology that has been completely disconnected with concerns, with practical day-to-day concerns. And I hope that those of you who read this book would find the theological discussion more invigorating, more relevant. Speaking of relevance, it's been a year since the book was published, but I still very much am convinced that these concerns, these questions, these ideas are extremely pertinent and current. I've seen just a couple weeks ago an article from The Guardian in the UK where people were writing in, readers were suggesting their the best ways to combat climate change. And several of those answers actually involved not having any children, which is one of the ideas we discuss in the book. And in fact, I just saw that recently there was an article published in Finland where some other very similar ideas relating to digital consumption were being addressed, and even the term individualism was being used, which I found quite fascinating. So a final caveat, I guess, before I begin, is that I'm trained as a historian and as a theologian. Moving forward, I think that it will become hopefully apparent how those are relevant here. I'm not an environmentalist, a scientist, an economist, but I've worked for quite a while now with organizations like the Jubilee Center and others in Europe. And my current perspective, my current position here in Africa, in the majority world, has actually strengthened a lot of the ideas that are introduced and discussed in the book. The most pertinent that I want to just throw out there here at the beginning is that the Western world, for far too long, has thought it has all the answers, has convinced itself that it is completely self-sufficient. And of course, there are many problems with that. But increasingly, people are realizing that answers need to be sought in the majority world. I deal with theology, especially in the country of Ethiopia. And so a huge part of my move here to Africa was actually an attempt to position myself in a place where I could be learning from, collaborating with voices from the majority world. And so a central argument in our book is that we need to rediscover and listen to and learn from perspectives that have long been traditional and valued in places outside of the Western world. And that many of the methods and practices and habits that we have cherished in the Western world, in North America and Europe, are precisely the things that have landed us in the position we are now in with regard to the climate. And just a final little explanation, in the book, we use the term low-income countries. You'll see that, and I'll try to be consistent using low-income and also majority world. And the reason for doing that is because by using, a lot of people still use the term developing world, and they're primarily often speaking about economic infrastructure status, but sometimes that bleeds over into other areas of life, and people think, oh, that country, that part of the world is developing, and they're not as good as us in many other ways. So we prefer not to use that term, and we talk about low income with reference to gross domestic product, GDP, and also majority world is a helpful term because it reminds us that most of the world is still living in a certain way that is quite different from the Western world. That's done with all of my kind of preliminary remarks. I'd like to now ask Tapio to put up the slides, if that's possible, if he is hearing me. I guess something good is happening because I see the main screen changing here. So I'm just going to just quickly summarize the book, hopefully in about 10 or 15 minutes here. I don't want to read, page by page or anything. But my understanding is that most people who are watching this or who are attending will not have read the book already. So as an introduction, the history of climate change awareness, much of this book takes an ancient perspective, or rather draws from ancient wisdom found in places like the Bible. And so it won't be a surprise to many of us that people for a long, long time have known that humans can impact the climate. There are ancient writers in Greece and other places that talk about deforestation. Other people have talked about overfishing or hunting in an area, right? This is not a surprise, but the more modern developments are certainly in the 20th century, the latter half probably, books like The Silent Spring, which was written by Rachel Carson, and these begin to identify not just human impact per se, but certain types of human impact, especially dealing with large-scale industrial efforts and production and farming and certain methods of agriculture. With that progression, increasingly, I would say right about the time of the 2000s, the turn of the millennium, more sensational tactics, it seems, started to be used. So I recall when I was much younger, just a boy, somebody like Al Gore, and the types of presentations and talks that he gave, which really almost scared people, saying, if you don't change, if you don't do something, then these horrific things are going to happen to the world. And one of the things that has inspired this book is that it doesn't seem that those sensational tactics are working. We can look at America and say, those silly Americans, they're still driving their large SUV vehicles, even though they know that's harmful to the environment. Or we can look at people in Europe and say, oh, those British folks are still taking their vacations to Mallorca on a jet for just a few days, whatever. The recent report from the IPCC has also kind of, I think, heightened people's frustration, because they recognize that so much knowledge and scientific data is backing up these ideas, but people's behavior and actions are not seeming to adjust in accordance with that. So I think that these things align together to create some extreme responses, what I've called. So in the book, we talk about something called birth strike. And this is a movement of people who basically sign something that says, we're committing not to have any children. And there are other extreme responses as well that even call for voluntary extinction of the human race, and on and on. But because so as Christian organizations, as Christians, these responses not just concern us. I would say personally, for me, these really sadden us, because we care deeply about humanity and about relationships and about the social fabric of our communities, but we also care deeply about the environment. And it's understandable that people are really frustrated that the data, the information, the education is not seeming to match up with people's changed behaviors or lifestyles. So one of the things we say in the introduction is that we want to provide in this book an informed narrative of hope. And those three words kind of align roughly with the three main chapters, because we want to be informed. We want to think clearly and accurately and deeply about the situation and what's going on. We want to provide an alternative narrative, because many of the solutions or tips or hacks that are being provided currently are not at the level of lifestyle or worldview, we might say. They're isolated, they're compartmentalized. And so we want to provide a narrative or remind people that there is a deeper understanding of what human life is about. And then the final word is hope. because so much of the current debate or discussion or activity is really despairing, rooted in a lot of desperate attempts, and we think that there are many reasons to be hopeful. So that's kind of the introduction. I'm just going to quickly go through each chapter, very, very quickly. The first chapter is where we attempt to kind of dig deeper, make a deeper analysis, making sense of our situation. So one of our main concerns is that there's a lot of oversimplified thinking. It's surprising sometimes that a lot of the arguments people were using, a couple decades ago are still being used when it comes to environmental discussion. But the oversimplified thinking especially is problematic because this is a global conversation. And a lot of people have a very poor understanding of the realities in other parts of the world, especially in the majority world. And so one of the main things we talk about in the book and in this chapter especially is individualistic consumerism. And many of us are probably aware of individualistic lifestyles in the Western world and the consumption that follows from capitalistic kind of economies that are providing services or markets or things. But one of the arguments we make is that much of the current environmental movement doesn't see how these are mutually reinforcing, how they're joined together. So people who live in individualistic societies are continually encouraged to define themselves as an individual through the things that they consume, whether those are material goods, luxury items, or basic cars and clothes, or experiences, what you do for fun, where you go on holiday, or even the type of food you consume, or the type of products you buy in order to define yourself. Likewise, consumerism would not be driven in the same way insofar as marketing and all this stuff if it weren't for the appeal of setting yourself apart by what you consume. So that's a really important factor in our argument. And just to remind people that much of the Western world, the economic system and how we progress is built upon, it requires people to be dissatisfied with what their life currently is and encourages them to not just buy, but consume more things in order to make that happen. And there's other material you can read from the Jubilee Center about that. So there's four main factors. If you could put up on that slide really quick that we talk about. There's the geopolitical. One of the big points in that section is about global talent flow. So people leaving certain parts of the majority world to go to other places. These are the people who are most educated, most able, most with the best resources to make a change. The economic factors, that these are things that are affecting climate change kind of at a deeper level that we don't think about. A lot of short-termism, despite what people tend to say on the surface, I think a lot of people might claim that they are interested in the long-term well-being of an environment or something. But one of the things that we present with quite a bit of detail and data is something, it's abbreviated there, MSV on the screen, which is maximizing shareholder value. And even if this is something that individuals don't think they personally ascribe to, it's making a tremendous impact on the economic systems of the Western world because of how it is featured in pension funds, basically. People's pensions and the way that they are being invested in companies default to this, which tends to be very short-term, seeking a short-term return on the investments of individuals. Ideological and socio-demographic factors, there are several that we talk about, but the one I think is very important for people in the Western world to understand is that there is not a population problem in the Western world. In fact, within just probably the next century, most Western countries are going to be struggling to maintain their populations. Already we are beginning to see this. And so the argument about too many people is just not correct. And if people try to shift that argument to the majority world, the problem there is that the majority world is not mostly responsible for the damaging carbon activities that we are seeing. So 80% of carbon and climate impact is coming from 20%, the top 20% of wealth in the Western world. And then finally, the technological factors. If you just put that screen up one more time, this is really interesting as well, because many people in the West think my actions, my behaviors on the surface are not impacting the environment in which I live. But everybody who stores things in the cloud, who watches YouTube, who streams and does Zoom calls or video conferencing, that's a tremendous amount actually of energy is being used in those data farms. And some people have said, I cite this in the book, some people have said that all of the digital consumption in the world is roughly on par in terms of carbon output or footprint to the entire airline industry. This is a mind-boggling fact, and it's very important for people who are proud about their carbon footprint to realize that somewhere else in the world there is a data farm of servers, computers that's causing an impact. And then the final thing I'll say about that before we move on is about technology as a solution to a lot of our climate change problems. And so there are many examples we could offer about how technology is neither positive or negative in and of itself. It is neutral, but many times we see technology being used in an unexpected or incorrect way. And so in the majority world, I can tell that from some places I've been doing construction projects, there's somebody has purchased or provided a cement mixer. And this is supposed to increase efficiency, make the work better. But the people I was working with in these places, the indigenous population, refused to use that cement mixer, even though it would increase productivity and efficiency, because it would put people out of work. And so the value of relationships in those contexts is very important, because they would rather have more people earning a little bit of money than a few people earning a lot of money. Another example that's more relevant perhaps to the Western world is something like a laptop, which a student, let's say, some of my students here are supposed to be using for their classroom activities, for their assignments, for research. But it gets so bogged down with extra software, perhaps used for social media or for gaming or whatever, that it can't actually perform the task it's meant to perform. And so we must remember that technology should be leveraged wherever possible in our effort to combat climate change, but it is not a guarantee. And more important than the technology itself are the mindsets, the ideologies, and the worldviews that the people hold who are using that technology, and what they will be aiming to do with that technology. So that's basically chapter 1 of the book. We try to identify the problems of the Western world, especially individualistic consumerism, which is causing by far the most impact in terms of climate change, the types of behaviors that we have. So moving on, if we could change the slide, going to the next chapter 2. I won't spend long in this one. This is really the theological chapter in the book. And I've already kind of offered my perspective on why I think theology is very important. Several theologians today and philosophers would contend that people don't have a cohesive way to understand the world, whether you want to use the term worldview or theology or philosophy, but it is fractured. It is kind of a hodgepodge collection of things. And so in the Bible, we see a very cohesive vision that that pairs together the flourishing of humanity and the flourishing of natural environments. Never in the Bible are these depicted or intended to be in opposition. That can happen when there is failure, when there is sin, when there is brokenness. But fundamentally, the Bible sees and portrays or paints the picture of a mutual enrichment that occurs when humans are tending their natural environment, and then that the natural environment will also enrich the human communities that live there. So we talk about three main, this is broken up into three main pieces: identity, place, and purpose. I'll just quickly say, when it comes to identity, this is probably the most important one, because I mentioned quickly already, the way that humans are understanding themselves today, within probably the last, it's hard to say, within the last 100 years, is completely different from how most human beings have understood themselves for most of history. So let me explain why that is. For most of history, your identity as a human was about the ways that you connected to, that you were a part of, that you were involved with your community, your tribe, your family. So identity was rooted in the things that connected you with other people. Today, in our modern Western world, but increasingly in the majority world, identity is something strangely that is structured, that is defined by what separates you from other people, by what distinguishes you from somebody else. So you have to have slightly different clothes or an appearance or habits or lifestyles or preferences or whatever it is. And that distinction, that need to be separate, that need to carve out for yourself an identity, is, we argue, one of the biggest causes that is fueling the impact, a negative impact upon our natural world, upon the climate, because people are motivated to do more things that nobody else has done before, or that are unique or what have you. And a final point connected to this in terms of identity relates to the verbiage which is used in the European Union and other places of human rights. And human rights are very important, especially in the majority world. But if we understand that identity is about being connected to other people, what connects you, we argue in this section on identity that we need to talk more about human responsibility or human obligations. And there are other scholars who talk about this. You can look at the footnotes in the book. But if we only focus on human rights, it can tend to devolve into a discussion about what you get, what you deserve, and what you must be entitled to, whether that's from the state or a local government or whatever. And so by switching the conversation, by restoring a narrative that involves connection, we understand that our identity connected to other people means that we have responsibilities that we owe to other people, that we have obligations that we must extend towards others in order for our community and our social fabric to function well, in order for there to be real flourishing. I think that's enough about chapter 2. I want to move quickly to the last chapter here, just summarizing. So in this chapter, we try to pull the pieces together and talk about what it might look like kind of for societies, for communities to change. And so we use this term, a relational economy, which has been used before by Sallux and by the Jubilee Center. And the way that we kind of try to break that down and define it is to say that rather than an economic system viewing resources or money or capital, whatever, as the most important resource, this system would view human relationships as the most valuable element in making things happen, in helping a society to flourish, in creating prosperity, well-being, and even wealth. So we center the conversation on human relationships, and that causes us to do several things. One of the really important threads that occurs throughout the chapter is an emphasis on intergenerational relationships. So not just relationships among people of a similar age or even demographic, but stretching across socioeconomic and demographic structures, so that there is recognition of the various needs, but also the things that can be offered. So I think one of the most obvious pictures of this, where I personally can see a gap, has to do with our aging generations in the Western world. These are, we sometimes call them, well, there's a bit of a mix between the baby boomer generation and the generation above them. But we have aging populations who increasingly are being cared for by professional organizations or institutions, care homes, whatever. And they have mental illness, they have physical illness, they're lonely, and this is a very expensive way to take care of them when we put them in these care homes. Simultaneously, we have younger generations, both millennials, Generation Z, who are struggling to afford housing, struggling to pay off debts, especially student debts, and even small children whose parents in these younger generations cannot provide childcare. And so there's this kind of gap, it seems, where you have older people who have a lot of resources, who have a lot of wealth. Even a lot of these people in Europe and in North America, they own property, they have homes that are sitting empty, they're not being used. And you have younger people who are struggling to make ends meet. And so there have been some experimental situations, living arrangements in places like Sweden and the Netherlands and the UK, where these dots, these gaps are being connected. And you have older people caring for young children for a very reduced cost, or you have young students living for free in the homes of lonely old people. And we try to think creatively about how some of these things can be connected, and how older folks can be valued once again in their communities, in their societies, not because they are able to work physically, of course, not because their mental capacity or their professional talents can produce an economic or a financial gain for a company, but rather because they can care for families. They can provide something very meaningful to a community because of their wisdom, their life experiences, even though they might not be physically most healthy or mentally as sharp as they used to be. So this is a very fascinating conversation. Other things we talk about involve the increasing number of abandoned office buildings, which are some places are beginning to use these as convert them into living spaces. But we don't want to encourage individualistic, isolated apartments where people are living by themselves, which is very costly and not very efficient. We suggest intergenerational forms of living where people can share resources, share talents and time, and even finances, in order to produce things that benefit the entire community. So we use on the three concepts there in purpose, we use the term fruitfulness, which is kind of a biblical term, but it also works quite well when we speak about the environment, when we speak about a garden, because much of our modern economic systems favor or are geared towards productivity. And so an analogy I use in the book is that a plant, let's say a tomato plant, can grow very large. It can grow tall. It can have a lot of leaves. It can look very impressive. Or a cancer cell in the body can grow very large and take up more space. But if it's not fruitful, if it's not producing something that is valuable or meaningful or beneficial to the society in which it's taking place, then that thing we cannot call a good contribution. And I think so. This image of fruitfulness we try to play with, we try to suggest that local communities and businesses should be thinking more about the things that they can, the things that they can offer, being fruitful, the things that they can offer to their surrounding community, their environment, their immediate region, which can benefit them, that are not financial or monetary in their nature. So now I think we have a final slide. I've been talking for a while. I'm going to wrap up. I just want to offer some questions now, moving forward. Personally, for me, since writing the book 1 year ago, or since publishing it, the question that has really stuck with me now that I live in Africa is the challenge of the majority world, because so many things that are taking place in countries in Africa and in Asia are troubling, because many of these low-income countries are striving to reach standards of living or standards of infrastructure or standards of economic output that match the Western world. And I think I put there in parentheses, I feel a certain amount of guilt about the Western world, because I want to tell a lot of my friends here in Africa, my colleagues, my colleagues in other parts of the majority world, that much of that idealized image that they're searching for, that they're reaching for, is not actually is not going to deliver on what it promises. So we have, I mentioned in the book, many majority world, low-income countries with incredible biodiversity. Places like the Congo in Africa, places like Bolivia in South America, or Indonesia. Incredible biodiversity, but that biodiversity is being dangerously threatened and set aside in order to make a fast track towards more economically productive, viable systems of production or what have you. And so I want to tell these people, don't be so quick to emulate what you see the Western world is doing, because we in the West are the ones who are struggling with unprecedented levels of mental illness, unprecedented levels of addiction and unsatisfaction. And the things that we are missing, increasingly we are aware of these things, are green spaces and traditional ways of living, traditional ways of producing food that is healthier and locally produced, relationships with families that are not separated by thousands and thousands of kilometers. So this is a real challenge to me, and I talk about this quite a bit in the book, the disparities between people who are located in the Western world, but who are apparently concerned about what's happening in other parts of the world, but there's strange disconnections and connections. That's a big challenge for me. The other points on the slide, I just want to kind of offer, I think, some very practical ways to move forward. In the theological section, I try to emphasize the importance of particularity. So rather than trying to fix deforestation in the Amazon, it's very, very important that we focus on our own particular area. But this should not just be an individualistic effort. I'm not saying that individuals need to convert their lifestyle only, or try to stop using plastics or vehicles or whatever. And this is a big argument that Jubilee Center and Sallux are making. Yes, we need people, individuals from the bottom, grassroots efforts of lifestyles being changed, but we also need top-down movement from institutions and governing bodies that can make this change. So we need a simultaneous effort. So what I try to do here is kind of structure, what would a relational economy look like in my own community or in my region? how could you envision transforming your community, your town, your whatever suburban area, your section of the city, so that human relationships become more valued than any of the other resources or things that people currently value? And then what steps could I take in my area to increase the strength of the life-giving relationships? Because that's really at the heart of the relational economy. And I know for a fact, many of us are connected to groups already, whether that's on social media or in churches or community groups. And we really want to try to leverage those relationships that already exist, rather than having individuals try to change their own lifestyle. So to think in that way, how can you leverage the group that you're already in by saying, let's say a church, hey, how about everybody in our church commits to changing their front lawns? I can't remember. My time in Finland is limited. I can't remember if you have lawns in Finland or what, but converting your front lawn into a vegetable garden. And then it's not just you, but it's your entire church. And then you have the produce that's produced from that, and you can do something meaningful. And as a theologian, as a ordained minister, actually myself, I think, how can we broaden out from there and utilize connections even within church denominations? So you can think across the country of Finland, how can these changes, and they have to be voluntary, but simultaneously self-limiting. And this is the beauty of being in human relationships of mutual responsibility, because you recognize that by limiting my own behavior, I am blessing and helping somebody else in my group whom I care about. And I think that desire is found in a lot of other groups who are not religious, secular groups, but they recognize that I want to limit my own behavior to help somebody else, limit my own lifestyle choices. But if you're not connected in a deep, intimate way of self-limiting obligation and sacrifice, then I think that connection, that social fabric, can't work in the way that it's supposed to, the way that I believe God intends it to work. So I think I should stop talking now. I've gone for quite a while. I hope that's been useful, but I'm really interested to hear some Q&A. I can't see how many people are presently listening, so maybe it'll be shorter than I expect. But thank you for your time. So now I can't hear you, Tapio. Uh-oh. Should I try to log into Facebook maybe?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, thank you, Calum, so much for this presentation. And it's been quite interesting. We have a few comments here and questions also from the viewers. And maybe we'll just move straight on there because we have a limited time.
Sure.
But I also wrote down quite a few questions that came to my mind when I read the book, and maybe I'd also like to challenge you at some point, because of course,
please
questions are many people are thinking of these questions, but it's very hard to find kind of a solid ground under your feet. I would say that's my impression, and that's where this book offers some like roots for or foundation for thoughts. But first, there's a question or comment from one of the viewers saying that I will actually read the whole comment. Individualistic consumerism is an expression of the need to distinguish oneself from others, but it's also an expression of the need to belong. People buy the kind of clothes that indicate that they belong to the cool group and so on. So instead of fulfilling the need to belong with cultivating fruitful relationships, we try to buy our way to a group we admire. So is that true? Is that something real? I guess this was also addressed in the prologue of the book.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's an important thing to consider, and it's valid. I guess my my argument or my perspective would be that those types of groups that are kind of identified in that way with clothing are still more modern, rather than older groups that were defined more by territorial, ethnic, linguistic, familial, those types of things which used to define a group. But it's a valid point. I would be curious to hear more from that person. I don't know if that will work out, about how if they see that is an only negative. Certainly, if clothes are produced, let's say, by a group, something like that, and can be sustainably sourced and maintained, that's one thing. But it becomes very problematic when a group of young people or whatever are getting their clothes from another place in the majority world, and we have the phenomenon of fast fashion, which is extremely detrimental to the environment. And I think there's another layer deeper, where if you see a group of young people, they all want to look kind of similar, but they can't look exactly like somebody else. So their clothes have to be slightly different, and that's what causes them to purchase something one time and then throw it away. So it's nuanced, but that's a fun thing to talk about, to consider.
Yes, we could go back to that at some point, but let me challenge something you at some point. My first question would be about values.
Okay.
And I've been thinking of this materialism and seeing it myself all over the world. So is it so much a Western phenomenon, or is it something that is in the human, or is it something that we have actually Western, would say Enlightenment thinkers with the liberalism and consumerism and individualism that followed from the Enlightenment tradition, and also some argue actually from the Protestant Reformation and so forth.
Yes.
That it has actually long time ago permeated the whole world, and I have lived in Asia for 2 years, and
Okay.
I think I found people there actually more alienated from the nature, let's say at least from nature, than what I see people in Europe, or especially in Finland, where we still have some kind of idea like nature it's something not very far from us. But there I saw it much further. People didn't have any understanding or connection to natural environments whatsoever.
Okay.
And that's true for large parts of Asia, and also in Africa. I've seen people have very materialistic mindsets. But
Yes.
I'm just thinking, if this is something that has been exported quite successfully, or imported, or is it something that's really in us as humans? Like greed is there, like this in different
Absolutely.
culture.
Yeah. So I would want to distinguish between materialism or greed, separate that from the individualistic desire to own things, right? And there's a long history. I've written something else for the Jubilee Center that follows the history of kind of individual ownership. A lot of people trace it back to England, when in the Middle Ages, lords began to grant lands to kings would grant lands to royal people, and they say, you own this land now, you have a charter. So I think, of course, I think there's something in humans that wants to own, that wants to possess. But I think there's been a shift in more modern times. Last week, the Protestant Reformation is important, where people have wanted to make that ownership individual from other people, whether that's the type of home that you live in and separating that off from other people, or the type of tools that you use for accomplishing your tasks as a family, rather than sharing those possessions. And so I think that type of individualistic materialism is what has been very detrimental as it's exported to places like Africa, because you're very, very right. I see all the time, young people now in Africa, they have a smartphone, and they save their money so that they can buy a certain whatever it is, a certain item which links them to the image of success they see in the Western world. But that individual desire to own something is different from, I think, the natural human desire to possess something, maybe as a family. Sacred objects, especially going way back, like the idol in a household, or treasured items that a family would value because of its deeper meaning.
Yes. Let me maybe challenge you with another question.
Okay.
Like thinking of from values and moral psychology, there is now actually this moral shift, or kind of a worldview shift from these kind of materialistic values towards more relational, or I would say maybe more non-material
Yes.
values.
Yes.
Once a certain level of safety and prosperity has been achieved, like, the next generation is more interested in
Yes.
nature once they don't have to struggle for getting their first
Yeah.
car or something. And this has been pointed out by moral psychologists like Jonathan Haidt, made this very popular, this argument. And it's
Yes.
quite clear here in the cities in the West, like, young people in cities are very like interested and concerned of in the environment.
Yes.
But the point here maybe is like, what I'm concerned is like, it's that's very, this lifestyle is it's quite, something new. It's very still quite individualistic,
Mm-hmm.
and or at least, the connection to the past, to the place, to the village where the grandparents maybe came from, that's like non-existent. Like, I see it in myself, like I don't have any relationship to those places where my grandparents came from.
Yeah.
And there is no going back. There is no going back to the tribe, there is no going back to the village, there's no going back to the extended family. So when we think of like building a relational lifestyle, it's like I felt it's like a parable that it's the challenge is so huge. It's like building a castle when you only have grains of sand. And we individuals, like, we are just like grains of sand, and it's just like, you try to put it together and it's like falls like whew, and
Yeah.
then somebody comes again and tries to build something else, and it lasts for a few minutes, and whew. So
Yeah.
the question, like, I'm working in politics, so my question like would be, whose job it really is to help create new kind of tribes or connections so that we could find a
Yeah.
more sustainable lifestyle. Is it
Yeah.
up to the government, or is it up to the families, or just individuals who are like heroic founders of new
Yeah.
kind of communities, or is it up to the church, or who is it this up to?
Great. So there are several threads in your question. I want to emphasize that, I mean, I agree with you. There's no going back, but in a lot of ways, we talk about this in the book. The nuclear family, which came to be really idealized in the Western world, is not the family structure that has existed for most of human history. It's a very strange idea that it's just parents and children living under one roof. So we talk about in the book a more robust, more ancient idea of a family, which still happens in many places in the world, where under one roof or in a compound or living complex, there are people related by blood, but there are also people who are there in other capacities, not just servants or maids, but professionals and people who are staying there, perhaps on a temporary basis. This could be students who are studying or making use. And you're absolutely right about the progression, I think, from materialism to something else. I've written about what I think is a step from materialism to experientialism. So a lot of people in Western Europe and in North America are skewing, are avoiding acquiring a lot of material stuff, but they want to instead use their money on experiences, whatever that will be, whether it's travel or more unique kind of, going to conferences or events or musical, tours or whatever. And I think there's a certain allure that is less environmentally impactful, but it's very difficult to prove this. I think we've done as well as we could in the book, but many families, especially in traditional places, they are limited by children. They accept limitation, that providing for a family means that you have to use your resources in a more frugal manner. Whereas many young people who are adopting these newer lifestyles have more disposable income, and what they choose to do with their money, when they look online or at the options, their options are being presented to them in the form of consumeristic modern economic options. And so we argue that even new green forms of consumption are not the best alternatives, because they still advocate some type of consumption. So if you have ecotourism, in some tropical island place, you are not actually you're not moving in the right direction. You're just moving less in the wrong direction, because you're still consuming something. You're just consuming it in a less detrimental way. So finally, to answer your bigger question, I think that the responsibility lies, yes, with governing institutions, with more local governing bodies, with individuals, but I would say more with families. Any place that we can find community and social structures still existing, whether that's churches or clubs, I really want to leverage those groups to try to think how they can use their resources and their connection, their shared goals and their shared vision towards these relational objectives, these more sustainable intergenerational ideas that we've talked about. So it's not easy, and we say in the book this is just a starting point. But it certainly cannot be accomplished. I know for a fact it cannot be accomplished by governments alone, and it cannot be accomplished by individuals alone. We need more robust solutions, and that's why the intergenerational households, I think, is a really, really fascinating, a dynamic approach, because it brings together people from different perspectives with different levels of resources to work together in these ways. And governments can facilitate that, as we talk about in the book, through tax incentives and through other ways of motivating people to choose those options of living.
Yes, that's a huge task for the policymakers and even those who kind of create this kind of ideas for policymakers. And I would really hope and look forward to some kind of follow-up to this publication, making this a little bit more, let's say, concrete, or something like more easier to chew on as a policymaker, because I think there's a lot to draw from these ideas concerning relationships and relational assessments. And I think some of this is already like a discussion of more on relational analysis of policy decisions. But if it's disconnected from this worldview or this view of the importance of relationships, it's kind of still a little bit superficial. And then of course we need to be humble about the limits of the government, because it can't solve everything here. I am quite certain that it's not the only solution. It can only provide the framework or the platform, as you said, or some kind of background support. We have quite a few comments from or and questions from the viewers, so I'm not even sure if we can go through all of them.
I'll
We
let
have
you choose whichever
yes,
ones you think are
yes,
most.
we have to finish in a few minutes.
Okay.
There's a comment on further comment on this consumerism that has become individualistic.
Yes.
And that's actually a very good point, because like when many people, like the generation that leaves the countryside, is leaving community, and then they say that they want to go to the city to be themselves, be unique,
Oh,
unique, but still it's natural that they look for somebody who's like them, and they create this
yes.
new community, and it can be happening through consuming the same way or consuming the same
Yeah.
things. and
Yes.
and that's kind of, in a way, the need to belong is a very powerful. I think this is a very good comment from one of the viewers. There is a question on relational thinking. What would that mean for the development of technology? That's a huge question. I don't know if that's a real specialty. We have another project on technology that we would try to forward this year. Is there any how to create relational technologies and technological solutions? This is a
So
huge
so
question.
quickly, I would just say about that one. Technology is so often developed separate from places where it's going to be used or implemented, and I don't think there's enough discussion with people making technology with what people actually need. So there's lots of examples about even there's a fascinating one about genetically modified plants crops in Ethiopia, and the person wanted the crops to resist and grow better, but it ended up turning out really terribly, because when the drought happened, the crops failed. And so more partnership with the developers of technology and the people they intend to use their technology, which is difficult, I know, but that would be my answer. And regarding the consumption again, if we can change even just the way we have these conversations, rather than what I consume that defines me, but the things I offer others that is similar. So that used to be a village thing. I come from a village that's known for its whatever, butter or cheese or milk or honey, and it's something that I offer. That's what defines me, rather than the thing that I take.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. That's really a different way of looking at it, and people have been always proud of what they can offer.
Yes.
There is a very hard question. I don't think this is actually a very easy one. It would go really to deep waters, but I would say that's a
Okay.
question like, on question on temperament, does a relational or interdependent approach value extroversion over introversion? That's a deep question.
So we need to point them towards the other, all, because that's not my area of expertise. The Jubilee Center has published very good books on that. The relational lens, I think, focuses on some of those dynamics, and that's the best place to look.
Yes. And then there's a question on social structures and constructs, like allowances and taxes. They could not only allow but also promote extended family living, for example, rather than preferring to support individuals living separately from others. That's a good comment. That's something that you pointed out. Maybe there's a way. Could be ways of doing tax benefits
Yeah.
to people who do certain kind of arrangement. Of course, some kind of
Yeah.
systems like that are in place in many countries. We've heard examples
Yes.
from Singapore, from Hungary, and even
Yes.
in Finland we have systems like
Yeah.
that give you tax breaks if you take care of your elderly parents,
Yeah.
and because it's so much cheaper also from best
Yes.
for society. But yeah.
We have a section in the book that talks about with intergenerational housing, where it exists already, trying to encourage that by governments saying, so many people in different countries build an addition on to the home, to an extra room to accommodate an elderly parent or something like that. And if governments can recognize that and say, we'll give you this tax break, or we'll give you an incentive to build that structure so that this elderly person can have their own living space, a small kitchen or whatever, then that can help build it up. But really, that's just a temporary patch. We want that to lead towards new, novel situations where intergenerational living structures are being invented and proposed and encouraged by the government. So we need to encourage, to help it along the process, but we also need to start doing new things in that same direction.
Yes, good point. I see we have been talking a lot about relationships. We have been talking a lot about communities and lifestyle of of individualism and consumerism. And I think the main focus in your book is on this. But so far, we haven't talked very much about climate change.
True.
So maybe I would have a last question, maybe
Sure.
concerning climate change. I myself have been uh, studying or following energy politics and then writing about that somehow. And of course, that's largely on the level of the government. So there is that level, and then there is this hard questions on individual lifestyle choices, and can we blame people? Should we even shame people for flying or watching Netflix movies also? Maybe we should have a Netflix shame, not just flight shaming, but Netflix shaming. That goes quite scary.
So,
but anyway,
perhaps I didn't do a very good job of connecting the dots when we were starting. I was a bit unsure if the stream was working correctly, but the position we take at the beginning is that so much good work has been done on climate change, but it seems like progress is not happening as it should. So we try to look at some of the deeper reasons why people live the way that they live, why they choose the lifestyles they do. And we believe very strongly that even if people have all the data in their head, that is not the strongest motivating factor that causes people to do things, to live certain lifestyles. The cars, the vehicles that they drive, the foods that they choose to eat, the holidays they have, the things that they purchase, right? And so we try to look at that deeper level of what causes human beings to do the things that they do. And one of the ways to say the central argument of the book is that individualistic consumerism and all of the things that involves and entails is the most damaging. That mindset or that lifestyle is really at the deepest level the most damaging thing to the environment, because that's what causes people to buy certain products, or to go on certain vacations, or to invest in certain companies with their wealth and their pensions, and all of these things are connected. And if it weren't for, so it's a very complex web, and we try to tease it out, but I'll just try to show one example. If elderly people were not afraid of fending for themselves when they got to a certain age in most Western countries, if they had the security of their family in this intergenerational structure, they would not need to invest their money or depend so much on government or private pension schemes to sustain them later in life. And if they were not investing in those pension schemes, then that would not fuel the short-term shareholder value in big companies right now, which would undercut then the environmentally damaging behavior of big tech companies, big manufacturing companies around the world. And that in and of itself would then reduce the damaging environmental activity that takes place. So we try to connect these dots and show the ripple effects that people's behaviors and mindsets have. It matters what people believe about what constitutes a good life. It matters how people try to achieve that and how they spend their money. But it also is very important to reveal, to expose the fact that some people think they're living very green. Another example, I can't remember if it's in the book, but the many cars that have that are electric vehicles, everything that goes into producing the batteries and the place that the electricity comes from to charge those vehicles is outsourced. Just like we outsource labor and other things, there's this very difficult reality of how we outsource and the impact that has. So that's kind of the deeper reason of the book.
Absolutely. Well, that goes far even to the discussions on economy, and the Jubilee Center has published and Sallux have published on lots on economy and relational approach to the economy, and I recommend to look at those publications too. And we also have some Finnish on the Kompassi website. But yes, I think we should be concluding now. I would like to make this final question,
Okay.
Because you are currently living in Kenya,
Yes.
right? And we have heard recently news of this huge famine that's taking place in Kenya, and you are there on the spot, and would be just as I understand, partly or largely, or at least to some extent, it's said it's because of changing climate, changing weather patterns
Yes.
that affect agriculture. That's reason for this famine now. I don't know how much that is true. Sometimes these are quite debated and very hard to prove. But anyways, the question is like, how are people doing there? Do they have hope, and do we have hope?
So do people in Africa have hope, and do people in the Western world have hope?
And people in general, the world.
That's a very deep question. In my mind, it seems very strongly that there's a correlation between people's hope and the amount, the degree to which they aspire to really Western ideas of success. If success for you is a certain amount of money or a certain type of home, which is these are very real things here in Africa, and how you display your success or things like that. A lot of people don't have hope because you are caught up in a system, and it almost feels like a lottery, like a gamble. If you get lucky with your business, or you align yourself with the right political party or whatever, then you might be one of the few who makes it. But I think that the people, in my experience, who have the most hope in the majority world and in the Western world are people whose hope is not connected to the material success or even professional status or something. It's that I have hope because my relationships, whether biological or non-biological, in the community, they're right here. They're things that I reap a benefit from right now. So I don't have to wait until my retirement to start living a good life or start relaxing or whatever. But the hope is right in front of you because you are experiencing the goodness, the security, the trust, the honesty, the mutual enrichment. And I would say that's very much true here in Africa. Many of the people who come to the city, to Nairobi, it seems they are more depressed because they are more cognizant of how far they have to go to get to Western standards. Whereas people in more rural places, they are more realistic and they are more satisfied with the good things that they have. Now, I don't want to paint an idealistic view in the other direction to say everybody has to go, like you said, we can't go back to the villages, we can't go back to the tribes. That's impossible. But I do think that we can return to an emphasis on human relationships, and we have to reinvent what that will look like in the future. So the book talks about the gig economy and how that creates new possibilities. So we need to move forward, but move forward with an emphasis on human relationships as the most important part of our societies.
Yes, that was great. I can almost say amen to that. That was
Yeah.
yes. I think this is a good summary and good encouragement for all of us. And thank you so much, Calum, for taking your time. And we are very grateful that thanks thanks to all this electricity and everything that
Yeah.
all over the world, that the connection was so good. At least we didn't have to travel. So
I'm
it
very
was great
thankful as well.
to have such a good connection all the way from Nairobi and
Yes.
to Finland. And I recommend this book. You can download it from the Sallux web store, or order hard copy, or the Finnish version you can download from our Kompassi website for free. So just a reminder, and thank you so much, Calum. We will
Thank
conclude
you.
this now, and really grateful for this time, and really encourage also. Thank you for this message of hope also. This is really
My
something
pleasure.
to take home.
Yes. I hope the conversation continues.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.